The altar at the bottom of the lake. There is a lake in northern Wisconsin that does not appear on any official map. This is not an oversight. The cartographers knew it was there. They chose, for reasons that were never formally recorded, but were passed between departments in the particular language of bureaucratic caution, to leave it blank. A patch of green where the water should be. The lake has a name, of course. The Ojibwe called it something that translates roughly as the place where the water remembers. The settlers who came after called it Glass Lake because on still mornings, the surface was so perfectly reflective that birds had been known to fly into it, mistaking sky for sky. Neither name was quite right. But the Ojibwe were closer. The water remembers. Miriam Calloway arrived at Glass Lake on a Thursday in September, the kind of day when summer and autumn exist simultaneously, and the light has that quality. Golden but edged, warm but warning you. She was 51 years old, a limnologist by training, and a professor of freshwater ecology at the University of Minnesota. And she had been trying to get permission to study this lake for 11 years. 11 years of letters to the county. 11 years of FOA requests that came back redacted or empty. 11 years of being told by increasingly uncomfortable civil servants that the area was restricted due to environmental sensitivity or geological instability, or simply that access was not available at this time. She had found the lake anyway, of course. It was not hidden in the way that things are hidden by walls or logs. It was hidden in the way that things are hidden by consensus, by the quiet, collective agreement of an entire region. To not go there, to not talk about it, to drive the long way round, even when the short way would save 40 minutes on a Wednesday evening. She went the short way. The access road was unpaved and so overgrown that her truck's paint collected a sleeve of scratches from the encroaching birch. There was no gate. There was no sign. There was simply a point. She could not identify it precisely, and this bothered her because she was a scientist and precision was her native language. At which the forest changed. The trees grew closer together. The bird song, which had been ordinary and plentiful, reduced itself to a single species she could not identify. A low, repetitive call that sounded less like communication than like counting. She parked where the road ended, which was where the trees ended, which was where the lake began. And for several minutes, she simply stood at the shore and looked at it. It was beautiful. She wanted to be clear about this in the notes she kept, which were meticulous and dated and written in the particular shorthand of her discipline. It was extraordinarily, almost aggressively beautiful. The water was black, not the tea-stained brown of most northern lakes, but a true, lightless black, as though the lake existed at a depth that color could not reach. And yet, the surface caught and held every detail of the sky above it, with a fidelity that made the reflection more real than the original. She had studied water for 30 years. She had never seen water like this. Her instruments were simple: a Secchi disc for clarity readings, a multi-parameter sonde for temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, sample bottles, a depth sounder. She was not here to be comprehensive. She was here, this first time, to establish baselines, to measure what the lake was, before she began the longer work of understanding what the lake meant. The Secchi disc disappeared at 2 inches. This was not possible. A Secchi disc in water, this apparently clear, should have been visible at meters, not inches. She checked the disc. She checked the line. She lowered it again. 2 inches. Then nothing. As if the water below that depth was not water at all. The sonde readings were equally wrong. The surface temperature was appropriate for September, 61 degrees. But at 3 feet, the sensor returned a value that her instrument displayed as an error code. Because the number it had measured was outside the range the manufacturer considered physically possible. She would later determine, by reading the raw sensor data, that the temperature at 3 feet was approximately 412 degrees Fahrenheit. At 6 feet, it was below freezing. At 9 feet, the sensor stopped responding entirely. The pH was 7.0 at the surface. Precisely, exactly 7.8. Neutral to a degree that distilled laboratory water rarely achieved. At depth, the readings oscillated so rapidly between extreme acidity and extreme alkalinity that the display flickered like a dying fluorescent light. She sat on the shore and looked at her numbers and felt something she had not felt since the early years of her career, when she had first understood that water was not a single thing, but a continuous negotiation between forces: thermal, chemical, biological, geological, that were always and everywhere, in conversation with each other. She felt wonder, and below the wonder, something older, something that was not quite fear. She returned the next day with a different set of instruments, and the day after that, with a colleague, Thomas Aurelio, a geophysicist at Duluth, who owed her a favor and who had, she knew, a higher tolerance for anomalous data than most scientists she worked with. Thomas stood at the shore and looked at the water and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Mary, this lake shouldn't be here." She asked what he meant. He knelt and placed his hand flat on the ground near the waterline and held it there. He was quiet. His face did something she had not seen it do before, a kind of careful neutrality, as though he were trying very hard not to react to what his hand was telling him. "There's no basin," he said. "Geologically, there's no reason for water to collect here. The bedrock underneath us is continuous granite. No depression, no fault, no glacial scour. This lake is sitting on top of solid rock." "Then what's holding the water?" she asked. He took his hand off the ground and looked at it and wiped it on his pants, though it was not dirty. "I don't think anything is," he said. "I think the water is holding itself." They brought sonar equipment on the 4th day. The surface readings suggested a maximum depth of approximately 90 feet, deep for a small lake with no geological basin, but not impossible. Miriam had seen stranger formations, except the sonar kept going, past 90 feet, past 150, past 300. At 500 feet, the signal should have been meaningless, scattered, attenuated, lost. Instead, it returned crisp and clean, and detailed, as though the water at depth conducted sound better than the water above it. At 612 feet, The sonar registered a flat, solid return, a bottom. And on that bottom, a shape, regular, rectangular, unmistakably constructed. Thomas wanted to stop. She could see it in his posture, in the way he had begun touching his wedding ring with his thumb, a habit she knew from years of fieldwork together, a tale that meant his body had decided something his mind had not yet articulated. She did not want to stop. She hired a detective team. This took 3 weeks because the team she wanted, experienced in deep, cold, low visibility freshwater work, was finishing a project in Lake Superior, and because she needed to be careful about who she told and what she told them. She said she was investigating an anomalous sonar return. She did not say the lake wasn't on any map. She did not say the water was 400 degrees at 3 feet. She did not say that every night since her first visit, she had dreamed of standing at the bottom of something. Not the lake, exactly, but something the lake was a door to. In perfect, breathable darkness, her bare feet on stone that was warm. She did not mention the dreams. The dive team was 3 people. Lena, compact and precise and irritatingly competent. David, who talked too much on the surface and went completely silent underwater. And Yuki, the youngest, who had a reputation for remaining calm in conditions that made other divers panic. They entered the water on a morning that was perfectly still. No wind, no birds. The single species she could not identify had stopped calling sometime during the night and had not resumed. She watched from the shore with Thomas, who had come back despite not wanting to, because, as he said, with the particular resignation of a person who understood that some things were more important than comfort. Someone needed to be the person who said stop. The dive proceeded normally for the first 100 feet. Lena's voice on the comm was calm and professional. Visibility was 0. The water below the surface was as opaque as it had appeared from above. But their instruments were good, and the descent line was solid. At 200 feet, Lena reported that the water temperature was comfortable. This should not have been the case. At 200 feet in a Wisconsin lake in September, the water should have been numbingly cold. But the divers' instruments agreed. 68 degrees, warmer than the surface. At 400 feet, David spoke for the first time. He said, "There's light down here." Miriam asked him to clarify. He said there was a glow coming from below. Not bright, not like a light source, exactly. More like the water itself was producing a faint luminescence, the way certain deep ocean organisms did. Except this was not biological. It was too even, too constant, too clearly intentional. Intentional. That was the word he used. At 550 feet, Yuki, who had been quiet the entire descent, said something in Japanese. Miriam did not speak Japanese. She asked Thomas, who did. Thomas listened to the recording. His face did the careful neutral thing again. She said, "I've been here before." He translated. But the verb tense is wrong. She used a form that implies it doesn't translate cleanly. Something like, "I have always been being here." Continuous, not a visit, a state. Yuki did not elaborate. She did not respond to requests for clarification. Her instruments showed her vitals as calm, heartbeat steady, breathing normal. No signs of nitrogen narcosis. At 600 feet, Lena reported contact with the bottom. Flat stone. Smooth. Warm to the touch, even through her gloves. And ahead of them, illuminated by the water's own soft light, a structure. It was an altar. Miriam could not think of another word for it, though she tried, because altar implied things she was not prepared to imply. It was a raised rectangular platform, approximately 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, carved from a single piece of stone that did not match any local geology. The surface was covered in marks, not writing exactly, but not decoration either. Something between the two. Symbols that seemed to shift slightly when Lena's camera light passed over them, as though they were not carved into the stone, but existed at a different depth within it. There were no objects on the altar. Small, carefully arranged. Lena described them one at a time, moving her camera slowly. A polished stone, a fragment of bone, a glass vial containing something dark and liquid, a folded piece of cloth that appeared to be dry, despite being 600 feet underwater. A ring. The ring was modern, stainless steel, engraved on the inside. Miriam asked Lena to read the engraving. There was a pause, longer than the transmission delay accounted for. It says Miri, Lena said. Just that. Miri. Is that? Do you know what that means? Miriam did not answer. Thomas was looking at her. She could feel his gaze, careful and measuring. The way you look at a person when you're trying to determine whether what you're seeing on their face is fear or recognition. It was both. She told the team to surface. David objected. He wanted to photograph the symbols, collect samples, document. Yuki said nothing. Lena, whose voice had lost its professional steadiness and acquired a quality that Miriam recognized because she'd heard it in her own voice on recordings from the shore. A quality of being close to something too large to hold. Lena agreed immediately. They surfaced in 20 minutes. Decompression protocols should have required hours. The water, it seemed, did not obey the same physics on the way up as on the way down. Or perhaps it simply chose not to. Yuki sat on the shore and looked at the lake and said, in English, very clearly, it wants to be found. It has been waiting. Miriam asked her what she meant. Yuki turned and looked at her. Really looked, in a way that felt less like eye contact and more like being read. And said, you already know. You've been dreaming about it. Miriam had not told anyone about the dreams. Thomas drove the dive team back to Duluth. Miriam stayed. She told him she needed to secure the equipment, which was true, and that she needed time to think, which was also true, and that she would drive back in the morning, which was not true, and they both knew it. She sat at the shore as the light changed. The golden edge sharpened to copper, then to rust, then to the deep violet that northern evenings produce in September. when the sky gives up its color slowly, like a secret told in stages. The lake was perfectly still. The reflection was perfect. And in the reflection, only in the reflection, she could see, very faintly, a glow coming from below, warm and steady and patient, the way a candle looks through a window when you're walking home in the dark and someone has left a light on for you. Someone had left a light on. She understood several things simultaneously in the way that understanding sometimes arrives, not as a sequence of thoughts, but as a single, complete shape that the mind grasps all at once and spends the rest of a lifetime translating into language. She understood that the lake was not a lake, that it was a threshold, a place where the membrane between what is and what is beneath had worn thin, or been worn thin, by something patient and deliberate and very old. She understood that the altar was not an artifact of some vanished civilization, but a living thing, a point of contact, maintained by hands that might or might not still exist in the way she understood existence. She understood that her career, her 30 years of studying water, her particular and specific expertise in the behavior of freshwater systems, her 11 years of letters and requests and quiet, persistent attention had not led her here by accident, that she had been, without knowing it, preparing for this, that the lake had been preparing for her. And she understood the ring. Her mother had called her Miri. No one else ever had. Her mother had been dead for 22 years. The ring was stainless steel, modern, the kind of thing you could buy at any jewelry counter. But it was 600 feet below the surface of a lake that sat on solid granite and measured 400 degrees at 3 feet. She took off her shoes. The grass at the waterline was soft and cool. She rolled up her pants to mid-calf and walked to the edge. The water was warm. Not hot. Not the impossible 400 degrees her instruments had measured. Just warm. The way bath water is warm when someone has drawn it for you, when someone has been thinking of your comfort. She stood, ankle deep, and felt the warmth climb her legs like a living thing, gentle and exploratory and precise. She could feel it waiting. Not the water. Something in the water. Something beneath it, or beyond it, or continuous with it, in a way that the language of surfaces and depths could not accommodate. It knew her name. She waded to her waist. The water supported her, not with buoyancy exactly, but with something more intentional, the way a hand supports a hand. Her instruments, her training, her 30 years of understanding water as a physical system governed by physical laws. All of it was still there, still hers, still true. But it was not enough. It had never been enough. It was the map, and this was the territory. And the territory was deeper and stranger and more beautiful than any map could hold. She could see the glow clearly now, below her, around her. She could feel the warmth of it, not just on her skin, but somewhere, interior, behind her sternum, in the place where grief lived, where wonder lived, where the things she had spent her life measuring and categorizing touched the things she had spent her life not knowing how to name. She took a breath. The air tasted like lake water and cedar and something older. stone, maybe the smell of deep places. She went under. Thomas came back the next morning, as he had known he would. Her truck was still there. Her shoes were at the waterline, neatly placed, side by side, the way she always left them. The lake was still. The reflection was perfect. He stood at the shore for a long time. He did not call her name. He understood, had understood, since the moment he placed his hand on the ground and felt the granite humming with something that was not tectonic, not thermal, not anything his instruments had words for. That calling her name would not bring her back. That she had not been taken. That she had gone. He picked up her shoes. He drove to Duluth. He filed no report. He told no one except Lena, who listened with the quality of attention that suggested she had already known. And Yuki, who said simply, "Good." The county continued to leave the lake off its maps. Miriam's colleagues at the university were told she had taken a sabbatical, then an extended leave, then, quietly, years later, that she had retired to somewhere private and did not wish to be contacted. Her students remembered her as brilliant and warm and possessed of a quality they found difficult to describe. A way of looking at water that made you understand it was not a dead thing, not a simple thing, not a thing that could be fully known by knowing its chemistry and its temperature and its depth. Thomas kept her shoes in his office closet for the rest of his career. When colleagues asked about the pair of women's hiking boots tucked behind his field equipment, he said they belonged to a friend who had gone somewhere she couldn't take them. The lake is still there, of course. Still unmapped. Still hidden by the quiet consensus of people who have decided, for reasons they do not examine too closely, to take the long way round. The water is still black. The surface is still perfect. And on certain evenings in September, when the light does that particular thing, golden but edged, warm but warning, there is a glow from below, faint, patient, steady, as if someone, somewhere beneath the surface, has left a light on. Thank you for listening to Storytime Scary Dark. If you know a lake that isn't on any map, if you've ever stood at the edge of water that seemed to be watching you back, maybe you understand. Follow the channel, and we'll see you next time.